Hi, I'm Rachel Barton Pine, and welcome to episode 8 of 24 in 24 Concertos from the Inside. Today we're going to be learning about the wonderful French classical period composer, Joseph Bologne, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. So my journey with this concerto goes back pretty much to 1992 when I was 17. This is in the days before catchy album titles, so it had the title of what sounds like a thesis, Violin Concertos by Black Composers from the 18th and 19th centuries. And that album came out and it got so much attention from students and parents and teachers asking for pedagogical repertoire by Black composers and from performers asking for music. And anyway, it all led to my starting my Music by Black Composers project as one of the projects of my RBP Foundation. So you can find links about the album itself and about my musicbyblackcomposers.org right there in the info tab. If you go to, there certainly were other Black composers from the classical period besides Saint-Georges. There's George Bridgetower, the great English virtuoso who was the violinist for whom Beethoven wrote his Sonata Number 9, which is now known as the Kreutzer Sonata, but it was actually not only written for but premiered with Bridgetower, who was one of the foremost virtuosi of his day. Saint-Georges is often erroneously referred to as the first Black composer, but in fact, there was one composer born earlier. Also, he was born on a slave ship off the coast of West Africa, and then he was in South America, and then he went to England when he was 2. Dramatic story, but Ignatius Sancho was in fact the first born Black composer and the first one to have his music published in the world. And you can learn more about him on our MBC website as well, and in our Black Composers Coloring Book, where both Sancho and Saint-Georges are featured among those curated set of 40 composers from the past to the present. So what do we call Saint-Georges? For all these years we've been calling him Saint-Georges. That is his title. And if you look at if we could actually pop up image 1, this is the cover page of the 2 violin concertos from 1775, and you can see Saint-Georges, his title, is the thing that's in big fat letters. You don't even see the words Joseph Bologne on the cover page of this score. But, Joseph Bologne is, of course, his name. So what is revisionism based on our current sense of how people are named, or what ought we to do? The problem is if you say, I'm going to play a concerto by Bologne, people will be like, who's that? But if you say Saint-Georges, more and more people are, of course, hearing of him. So maybe it's good to do both, and then we'll see which way things go. Obviously, I'm going to follow the lead of the general consensus among musicologists and programmers and things. It was interesting. I, like many people, was recently watching Bridgerton, and I noticed that Simon Bassett was referred to by his friends as Bassett. I guess it's a guy thing to do, to call somebody by their last name, or I guess appropriate for the period. And then after he became the Duke of Hastings, they had to remember to call him Hastings now. And so I was like, I wonder if maybe Saint-Georges is the thing to call Mr. Monsieur Bologne. So there is one thing we know about his name, which is that we shouldn't call him the Black Mozart. Now I understand the desire to do that, because a lot of people, the general public, haven't heard of very many classical composers at all. Maybe Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven, right? And so by saying the Black Mozart, you're saying, hey, this guy is of that level, which is actually an important statement to make. But it is, of course, problematic because you're not giving him his own status, like just relating him to somebody who happens to be white. And in fact, it's also, musicologically speaking, erroneous, because Saint-Georges came first. And I am going to call him Saint-Georges because after 30 years, I'm just used to it. But Saint-Georges came first, and Mozart was actually inspired by him, and I'll be showing you a little bit about that later. But like Saint-Georges wrote these wonderful Symphonias Concertantes, and then Mozart was inspired to write some Symphonia Concertantes after becoming aware of Saint-Georges, stuff like that. So Saint-Georges was born on the island of Guadeloupe in the French West Indies. His father was an aristocratic plantation owner and his mother was enslaved by his father, but he was raised as a gentleman. They ultimately had to go back to France because of the changing political situation in the islands and his father wanting to give him every opportunity that he could. And so he was enrolled at a private school where he studied all the gentlemanly arts like horse riding and sword fighting and all of these things. And apparently he was quite the prodigious athlete. I mean, it's really like the equivalent of being Paganini and an Olympian at the same time. Almost unbelievable. Saint-Georges commissioned and conducted Haydn's Paris symphonies, so it's thanks to Saint-Georges that those famous symphonies exist. He became first the concertmaster and then the conductor of Gossec's own orchestra, and he was so esteemed by his colleague musicians that he was invited to become the director of the Paris Opera. But then the singers, specifically the women singers, the divas, complained to Marie Antoinette that they didn't want to take orders from a colored person, and so his invitation was rescinded. Besides numerous violin concertos and sinfonias concertantes for two violins and orchestra, he also wrote symphonies. He wrote some of the first true string quartets in all of France. He wrote operas, and he wrote 6 wonderful duos for two violins that you can actually find in their original 1700s print in score form, but totally legible, totally usable from the page. And those are up on IMSLP. You have to click on I think that link is also in the info tab there on Our Concerts. And when you go to IMSLP, you have to click on the Collections tab. What's interesting is his opening theme. It never returns in the solo sections. Otherwise, it's a pretty standard, sonata allegro form. You've got your opening tutti, which is more or less an exposition, and then a second exposition with the soloist, and then a development, and finally a recapitulation. But he doesn't ever return to that first theme. And indeed, he's so inventive with themes. My friend Quinton Morris posted on social media the other day about just how many interesting melodic, thematic ideas Saint-Georges has for his compositions, that they're just chock full of them. It's like when you talk about, Metallica's Master of Puppets, the fact that it has something like 13 different riffs, whereas you're lucky in most songs if they've got 4 or 5 or 6. So he was just, spilling over with creative ideas. But theme 2 and theme 3 from the opening tutti do indeed reappear numerous times throughout the solo sections and subsequent tuttis, and those are this one. And then this other one. Here he does have some pianos and some fortes, but one of the things you have to always decide is a piano staying piano and then the forte hits as a sudden subito forte? Or does the piano perhaps crescendo into the forte? And there are various spots where I've chosen one way or chosen the other based on how the music seems like it's going, or really just my personal taste. There's a spot in the tuttis that happens a couple of times, and I could have done either way. But instead I chose to not crescendo, made a hairpin, and came in with a subito forte. Here's a fun spot at the end of the first solo section, the Exposition. So he goes all the way to the end of the fingerboard. Remember, this would have been a Baroque fingerboard still with a transitional bow. So that literally would have been the end of the fingerboard, about as high as you could get. And he just, climbs right up there, no problem, and then jumps way back down low. Well, that had been something Mozart had never done in any of his music, but then after he crossed paths with Saint-Georges, you suddenly get this at the end of Mozart's Symphonia Concertante. Coincidence? I don't think so. And then Saint-Georges does something that Mozart definitely never does at any of his concertos. He goes into tenths towards the end of the final solo section. Again, just kind of, throwing them in there as part of the melodic line. And so clearly he had very masterful control of high-level technique. There's even some violinistic barilage things. Almost reminds you of something from a Locatelli Caprice. The next one is much more typical, and you could do it like that. You could do it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, or a full quarter 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Of course, since it's a tutti, you have to decide and tell the rest of the section what it's going to be, so we can all do the same thing. Now, why wouldn't a composer have just written 2 quarters or whatever he might want the rhythm to be? It's not just because the composer was allowing you to make your own choice and have some agency in the matter. It's also because by writing it as an appoggiatura, the composer is telling you that there's something special about the emphasis on that note. And so if you saw 2 quarters, you might just go... But because the C sharp is an appoggiatura, you are more likely to bring it out as something special. So that's really why composers did it that way. So the beginning of the first solo section after the opening tutti, interestingly, has the same long A as the first solo section of the first movement, and then of course goes somewhere completely different. Dum bum 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 bum. So the rondo itself, if you can show image 9, it's kind of a 2-part rondo, and Mozart also did this in his rondos. You have the soloist playing the rondo theme, and then the orchestra repeating the rondo theme, often with a open and closed ending, right? So you have... And the orchestra is just the upper string. So very, very light accompaniment, and then you get to the full section. So same tune, but much more vigorous, and the violins are... So that's really fun for them to get to dig in and be kind of noisy during the second half of each rondo. And then the scheme of the whole movement, if you call the rondo section A, then you've got A, B, A, C, A, D, A. But always the middle episode, what you might call the C section itself, is in ABA format. And the ABA is always minor, major, minor. So you've got the minor key that kicks in, which is actually, this movement is in A major, the key of the concerto, and then the minor episode is in A minor. And then its middle section is in the relative major of A minor, which is C major. And actually that same scheme is followed by all these other Saint-Georges concertos, which is really fun. You get a lot of good variety of mood because of that, of different affect. And then, in the last episode of the rondo, before the final iteration of the rondo, there's this virtuosic bit that I'm convinced was inspired by Saint-Georges' fencing prowess, because he's whipping his bow between the G string and the E string so much that I just think of swords slashing through the air. This is picture 12. So I'm literally doing that. I'm like, whoa, that guy must have been in good shape. If you want to learn more about repertoire by Black composers, you can go to our Music by Black Composers website. And if you go to the sheet music tab, and then you click on repertoire directories, then you can find, and actually we have this exact link in the info tab, but if you're not on Our Concerts and you're just, how did I get to that? You go to musicbyblackcomposers.org, sheet music, and then repertoire directories. There's a directory of music for violin and orchestra, and a list of titles isn't going to do anybody any good, because how do you find the music? Is it usable? What does it sound like? Etc. So we've tried to provide all the information about the length, the instrumentation, where to buy the music, how to hear the music, and all of the things that you might need in order to decide whether you're going to play it or not. We do hope to add a field that will tell you its skill level. Is it intermediate, advanced, or professional level? And we're still working on that assessment, but all the other data is in there, and you can have a fun time searching around and seeing all of the many concertos by Black composers from the 1700s to the present that exist, from composers around the world, both men and women. Next week's concerto is Prokofiev 1, so really looking forward to that. And there's lots more to come. Next week will be episode number 9, and we're going all the way till 24. So many more months of fun still ahead of us. And if you want to send in a question, you can send it in as a written question, as an audio-only question, or best yet, like Will did today, you can send in a video. Landscape is preferred, and selfie mode is just fine. And if you do send in a question, you get a free ticket to that week's episode, which you can use to watch the live stream or the video on demand afterwards. So thanks so much for watching, and hope you've had a great Black History Month. I know next month we're getting into Women's History Month, but as we say at the RBP Foundation, every month is Black History Month, and there's always so much great music to enjoy and discover. Take care.